Hi, my name is Barakah, and today I will be presenting my AP capstone research project on knitting the threads of cognitive function. So to start off, what led me to this topic? So at the beginning of the year, we did some activities where we looked at some feedback from previous year's AP research students, and one of the biggest pieces of advice that I took away from this whole process was to pick a topic that really interests me and that I was very passionate about, because this was going to be a project that I worked on the whole year. So I thought about what really interests me and what I really wanted to look forward to throughout the year and to really dig deeper into. So one of my biggest hobbies is knitting and crocheting. So I wanted to incorporate that into the project that I chose to do this year. So I incorporated my love for crafting activities with also my determination to benefit others. I wanted this project to be not just something that I have for myself, but I wanted to be something that could eventually benefit those around me and be used for a greater cause. So that led me to my topic. So while I was doing some preliminary research on crafting activities and various different things relating to that, I came across some stuff and some similarities in my research. So while I was doing my research, I found that one of the main things that most studies that already exist on this topic focused on was stress relief, things like improving fine motor skills and improving mood. So there was already a lot of research based on these things, how things like crafting, knitting, crocheting, those types of things can help with stress relief, improving one's fine motor skills, and improving somebody's mood. So I wanted to focus on a different aspect of these hobbies and see if I could find a correlation between crafting activities and more advanced cognitive functions. So the cognitive function that I chose to focus on is problem solving. So as I was digging deeper into this, I found some key sources that really helped me throughout the rest of my research and laid down the foundation for my own research. So the first source deals with something called metacognition, which is essentially a person's ability to think back at their own previous actions and thoughts and kind of recollect what they've done in the past and think about it in a deeper setting. So this study specifically focused on how metacognition works in the brain and how it is enhanced by certain creative activities. So this study in particular focused on creative writing. So I wanted to utilize those aspects of the study and implement it in my own research and say, okay, maybe I can use the aspects of their research that they got and see that correlation between creative hobbies and creative writing and see if I can translate that to things like crocheting and knitting, and if the same brain pathway can be activated through that. Another key source was this one, which talks about divergent thinking and executive function. So these are both cognitive skills that are very important for problem solving. These two skills in particular are basically to relate to how we organize information in our brains, and that's a big part of problem solving. So I wanted to see if there's a correlation between how this works, like activating these cognitive skills, and if they can be used through crafting activities. So this study in particular, they focused on things like painting and drawing, and they had the participants do those, and they saw a correlation between their ability to use these critical skills like executive function and divergent thinking and the time that they spent doing those creative tasks. And the final one is something called the DMN, or default mode network. So this is a brain pathway that has a correlation with creativity. So in this research study, what they found was that doing activities that stimulate this pathway can increase people's focus and attention span. And those were two of the key things that I really wanted to talk about throughout my research and focus on. So I basically want to tie together, as I said earlier, these crocheting and knitting activities with cognitive function and problem-solving abilities. So this leads to my actual research question, which is, how do crafting hobbies like knitting and crocheting impact one's problem-solving skills, if at all? So I had some goals going into this that I talked about earlier, not only just discovering like more underrepresented cognitive benefits of knitting and crocheting, but I also wanted to see if it could have like a real world application. So I wanted to see if it could provide practical insights for integrating these hobbies into therapeutic or educational settings as a way to help people increase their problem solving skills and feel more comfortable in that area. So the methodology that when I was choosing my methodology, I knew I wanted to pick something where I was directly in contact with other people, because part of my research is seeing how people respond to doing these activities and if there's any change. So it was important to me that I picked a research method that allowed me to talk to people in person and kind of see how they reacted to these activities. So that kind of ruled out things like observational studies and certain other methods of research. So I landed on survey research as a way for me to test this. So to break it down a little bit further, the way my research method worked is it involved weekly surveys. So I planned this out over a 4-week time period, and each week the participants would be given a survey to finish at the end of the week, and each week they would do a certain allotted amount of time of the given crafting activity. So I left it up to them to choose which activity they wanted to do so that they had some free reign, and because people have different personalities, different interests, so I left it up to them to pick which one they wanted. But it started off as 15 minutes the first week and then increased in 15-minute increments. So by the 4th week they were doing 1 hour of this activity throughout the week. So, and then at the end of each week they answered the survey, which included quantitative questions such as Likert scale questions, which were on a scale from 1 to 10. So the participants would basically rank how they felt after the past week, and then qualitative open-ended responses, which included problem-solving puzzles that allowed me to get a more objective answer to see if they really were improving. Because sometimes doing an activity more and more makes you think that you're improving, but sometimes that correlation doesn't really exist. So I wanted to have some objective questions to see for myself if that correlation really was there. But during this process, I came to a little bit of a roadblock. So what happened was, because of my whole experiment type portion of my research required a lot of time from my participants. It needed them to be engaged for the 4 weeks and to put in the time throughout each week to complete the activities. I didn't get as many participants as I initially expected. So this led me to shift my study slightly. So I ended up making my study a case study. So I focused on 2 participants that I had, and I carried out the rest of the research using the results from these 2 participants. So for my results after the 4 weeks, I broke it down into the different questions that I asked them. So this question was on their ability to focus, and the results are graphed with their score and how far along in the research process they are by week. So as you can see, there's a clear increase, but as the graph shows, it kind of like tapers off at the end and it comes to kind of a halt. So that was pretty consistent throughout the rest of my questions, which kind of showed one of the limitations of my research method, which was that I didn't have as many participants, so my results were less varied than I had expected them to be and hoped for them to be at the beginning of this. And another limitation was that I also had, because of the lack of participants, there was more difficulty generalizing my results. So a lot of the results could have been seen as skewed due to a certain person's point of view or their individual experience. And also, participant honesty wasn't guaranteed because I wasn't by the side of my participants as they were taking the surveys. So they did sign a consent form and like an information letter at the beginning of this process to basically acknowledge that they were gonna be as truthful as possible. But at the end of the day, I'm not there next to them to oversee that. So there could be some discrepancies there that are affecting the results. And also the limited time span. So with this, I only had 4 weeks to work on the experimental portion of this and then to analyze the results. So we could have seen possible differences and changes throughout the results if there had been more time, because then it would be easier to see clear trends and not just to go off of the short time span that we have.
Okay. What was the most important source of information you found while conducting your research for your methodology? And why was it important to your research process?
So one of the most important sources was actually one of the ones I talked about earlier, specifically the one that dealt with metacognition. So that was one of the big ones that formed my methodology, because that study basically talked about how the more time someone spent recollecting their previous thoughts and actions, the better they got at certain problem-solving activities and questions. So that kind of formed my methodology, because that made me want to increase the time span that the participants did the activity weekly. So like starting off the first week with 15 minutes and then increasing that in intervals, just to see if that correlation carried over to crafting activities like the ones we talked about. So that source was really major in like figuring out how I wanted to set up my experimental portion of my research.
Thank you.
How might your conclusions, findings, or product relate to the current body of work in the community or field?
So one of the goals of my research was to relate it back to an educational setting, which is where I'm primarily in right now. So I really wanted it to be used as like a source of as a teaching method for teachers if they needed to, because sometimes students struggle at especially at earlier stages of education with their problem-solving abilities, and it's really a core skill that they need to build upon as they move further in their education. So I wanted to see if these results would be able to be applied to that, and hopefully in the future, if further research is able to be done on this, we can come up with something more more solid results due to the lack of time and participants. I don't know if my results are as verified or reliable because of the skewness from the few participants. So hopefully in the future we can execute.
If you could revisit the research process, what would you do differently? Would you choose a different area of inquiry? If so, why? If you chose the same research question, what different method or approach would you use?
I think I would stick to this subcategory of my topic, because I think that it's a really under-researched part of the topic itself. There's not a lot of research on the higher cognitive functions that come from these sorts of activities. So I really did want to focus on that, so I wouldn't change that aspect. But I think something I would do is maybe make my survey aspect a little bit easier for people to engage in. Maybe make it so that it's less taxing for the person per week, because I think that's something that has shied a lot of people away from participating in it, and that kind of led to my results being less generalizable. So that would be something I would change.
You had a follow-up question to that is, how would you increase participation, or how would you increase the pool of participants? Are there any ideas on how to get more participants if you were to do this again?
I think this time when I was reaching out to my participants, I kind of relied on doing it by myself firsthand, trying to see if I could find people I knew might be interested and to participate in it. But I think in the future, if I were to expand upon this, I would probably reach out to teachers in specific, specific, to see if any of them had students they might recommend for it that they think could really benefit from this study. And I think that might be a better way to create more participants and also make the study better for the general public.
Thank you.
Any other questions at all? Any other comments? No? All right, cool. Thank you.